Thanks for being here, and we truly do appreciate the group coming together at the end of what has been a enlightening and yet trying time for us. And through the difficulties of filming we had, trying to learn about this country and sharing that experience with other people, we've gained a lot. And this part of the film is very, is important to us. I told you what the general purpose of the entire film is, so we don't need to go through that again. The world situation as it is now, again, like I told you, it makes the importance of this aspect of the film, I think, very strong. Okay, so now, beginning with the questions to our ambassadors. All right, and this can be answered, whoever, doesn't have to be in any order. Either one of you can answer, but both of you will have something to say, I'm sure. I'll ask the question first, then I'll ask it for the camera. What I want to know is why we're here. Why is the American mission here and the Soviet mission here? Is it along the lines of political and economic needs of our country, and also along the lines of simply maybe a goodwill sort of thing, of aid? Why are our embassies, the Soviet American embassies, here in this country?
Well, if I could start out. I think our government is here. We came back after the turmoil, primarily in the humanitarian phase, food relief, humanitarian supplies, and that kind of thing. Subsequently, we closely examined the country, what was going on, the economy, its human rights record, and that effort moved into more of a direct bilateral assistance program. I think we're here simply because we consider Uganda government as friends, as allies, as an important element in the whole sort of regional balance, if you will, within this part of Africa. And from our own government perspective, I think we are trying to facilitate the peace, the development that's going on. So if I had to answer the question, I think we consider Uganda a very important aspect, in this part of Africa. We're trying to facilitate that regional process of peace and tranquility, which we think are very important to this part of the world.
Right, I think it's only natural that when a country acquires independence, we establish a diplomatic mission here, and we established our diplomatic relations with Uganda 4 days after the proclamation of independence. And since that time, I think our relations with Ugandan administrations and especially with the people, were good, and we always tried to help Ugandans to overcome their problems which they had, economic ones, political ones also. And so we tried to, just to develop our relations on a friendly basis with this country. Our cooperation was quite active, and it is coming now again to become more and more active. We try sincerely to help Ugandan people to overcome their difficulties. And in general, as far as African continent is concerned, we don't have any special interest different of Africa's interest. We want to see African countries to solve their essential problems. to eliminate colonialism, racism in this country, to overcome backwardness, diseases, and so on. So this is our aim, to develop friendly relations with Uganda on a mutually advantageous basis.
We're all aware of traditional U.S. and Soviet frictions in the past. We all know this. And sir, you use the term allies and balance. Given the world situation today, what does allies and balance mean in the region?
Well, hopefully, in view of what's transpiring, certainly in Eastern Europe, hopefully it means more effort directed at peaceful means, if you will, as opposed to regional conflicts. And when I use allies, I'm thinking primarily of those countries who have more of a democratic process within their government, those countries who are moving away from statist economic policies, those countries who have some semblance, if you will, of a democratic form of government. Obviously, we feel that's very important. And with a lessening of tensions, worldwide, one would automatically feel that at some point in time, we possibly could come together in the developmental sense and work jointly to improve, the economic status of a particular country or a particular region. Once those world power tensions or the Cold War is diminished to some extent, hopefully at some point we will be able to come together and work jointly on other issues, as we have already done to some extent in Angola, I think, which is a classic example.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
May I add?
Sure, certainly.
I think it is necessary, and more necessary perhaps, to realize that we don't want to see Africa as a scene of East-West confrontation, but as a field of international cooperation, which is aimed to overcome those Africa's burning problems, as I already mentioned, to do away with hunger, with backwardness, diseases, to protect environment, to protect also political independence in real terms of African countries. So I think this is very important, and I think we should do away with old stereotypes now, when we thought in terms of confrontations, and we have to now to change completely our outlook, our mentality towards approaching African problems, and this is most important if we want really to help this continent, to overcome all those difficulties. Though continent is very rich in natural resources, human resources, it's only almost 1/3 of United Nations, which African countries, constitute, So this continent has a big say in international relations, in international fora, and I hope that we will see such, more active role of African nations in international fora, and it will help to ameliorate international climate, and it will be reflected in facilitating our possibilities to overcome economic backwardness in this particular part of the world.
I think you've read my questions, Mr. Ambassador. You're answering my questions before I even ask them. Very good. Given the changing situation, this is to both of you, given the changing world situation now, are the roles of the governments changing with regard to alignment within Africa? Meaning, are we as concerned about aligning countries in our camp as we are about improving the status of countries put it another way. In the past, it's been, are you pro-Soviet or are you pro-American? And boiling it down to a ridiculously simple idea. How important is alignment of nations that we're supporting these days? Are we trying to align nations to our camp or the Soviet camp, or are we more concerned with the development of the countries that we're involved with?
I think from the U.S. perspective, I think we're, especially in Africa, we're more concerned about the horrendous developmental difficulties that the countries are having as opposed to any alignment. I think those countries that fall into, let's say, the category or countries that we are trying to assist are those countries that adhere to some basic principles, if you will, as opposed to alignment. Human rights is a key aspect of those countries that we support. Those countries that do not have an appreciation or understanding for human rights, we tell them, we try to advise them, we try to facilitate the human rights posture. But if our efforts do not succeed, then we have problems in dealing with those countries. But it's more in this area than some political ideology. I think that's lessening in terms of importance. For example, as a number of years ago, concerned about Mozambique and its political ideology as a country. Well, I think all of that now has diminished to some extent, and we're working with the government in Mozambique, and I think we'll see more of that as we go along.
Okay, I think your question here.
I'm sorry to my bad English language. What is the importance of improving U.S.-Soviet relation to the developing world?
Is that for me or?
Maybe the Soviet ambassador can answer this. Try asking that again. Maybe look up once in a while.
What is the importance of improving U.S.-Soviet relation to the developing world?
Well, I think we saw recently very important changes in Soviet-American relations, which are becoming more and more business-like, friendlier, and it allows us, our two countries, I think, to not, let's say, compete, but more and more cooperate, perhaps. At least in future, I think it will be possible, I think, to more and more cooperate between ourselves, and to develop our relations with African countries, not to the, so to say, detriment, as sometimes, it was perhaps obvious to another side, but to sincerely help, assist African countries, for example, Uganda, in overcoming the economic, social, and other difficulties. But at the same time, of course, we don't want to look like countries who interfere, and we don't want to interfere at all, in affairs of those countries, because, there was, some mention by my colleague, that problem of human rights and so on, because we see African countries as independent, completely independent countries, which are able to solve their internal problems and conduct independent international policy also. So, of course, we are happier if we see that human rights are respected and so on. But still, it's up to the countries. You know, we don't want to interfere in those internal processes. For example, if we take Uganda, I'm here 3 years and 3 months, and during this period, I saw very important and welcome changes in this country as far as respect of human rights is concerned, as far as national reconciliation is concerned, as far as political progress, you know, democratic political progress is concerned. So we welcome all those developments. And of course, in such conditions, it's easier to develop relations, intergovernmental relations on a friendlier basis, on a basis of confidence building, you know, between ourselves and so on. So this is very important. But it's up to African countries themselves to solve their problems. You know, we can't advise here them how to do things. Of course, if you take African continent as a whole, of course we can't develop our relations now with South Africa for obvious reasons. But as far as the rest of Africa is concerned, in spite of the fact that we don't have the same good relations, you know, with all African countries, we still want to have them, and this is our policy.
Excellent. Maybe now a question for the African representative here. First, I'll just ask you to address any of the things here that you feel are pertinent from your perspective. Maybe the first one being, what do you see as the mission of the foreign embassies in this country?
Well, there is the first obvious one, that as members of the United Nations, and some of them as members of the non-aligned movement, the European missions, where you are trying to establish friendly relations with the country in question. So many countries opened missions here soon after independence. Partly, of course, as the ambassadors have already indicated, some of them wanting to have a foothold and develop an orientation, possibly to influence what is going on in the respective countries. But others, like African countries, which have missions here, because we are neighbors or because we are trying to understand one another. In the world of international relations, missions, embassies are an expected factor, an expected characteristic of relationship between nations. In fact, the limitation is money for these poor nations to have missions. For example, Uganda can't have missions we don't have a mission in Nigeria, we don't have a mission in Ivory Coast and so on. We would like to do that, but if we are limited by money. Now, so you have missions which are here because of purely political interaction. Perhaps there may be different reasons why some other missions are opened here. Obviously, a mission like the Soviet Union, the American embassy here, the British, they must have their own reasons, specific reasons why they must be here.
From your viewpoint, what should the missions be doing in this country?
Well, two things. I think the missions should be places from which correct information is being sent home. They should be communication centers. You know, a mission like any of the missions here would do Uganda a service if they portrayed correctly what is going on here. The problems we are facing, the successes we are making, the advances that are going on. That, to me, would be a major contribution. In other words, facilitating understanding. That would be the enhancement of international understanding. But if you have a mission which distorts what is going on, simply because it wants what is going on here to fit in the home policies, in the home ideological niche, then that one is not assisting the whole process of international understanding.
With that definition, how are these missions doing?
Well, you are not supposed, as the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, to publicly evaluate missions in that restricted, that focused sense. But I think we've been receiving a lot of assistance from these missions. Near all of them. Those who come from donor nations have been real assisting, especially since we came in power. Certainly, material assistance has been on the increase. And I would even say that even in terms of communication, I think we are reasonably presented to their home countries. Yes.
Okay. What improvements could the U.S. and Soviet embassies make as far as achieving that goal?
What improvements?
What improvement could our embassies make in achieving the mission of telling your story?
Well, I think the improvements are already being made because these ambassadors do approach us anytime they feel that they have queries to make, and they find us ready to give them answers. I would say on the whole we have been receptive, and they have been receptive. But obviously in the general sense, and this perhaps is an ideal, there is no way we can influence, we as a ministry or as the government influence their confidential reports, or how we look like and so on. But what one senses, at least talking to the ambassadors, talking to the high commissioners and so on, what one senses is that they are following fairly closely what is going on here.